Welcome back to Financial Fortitude, the podcast where we help high earners, families, and business owners balance living well today with planning for tomorrow. I'm your host, Michael Acosta, joined as always by my partner in financial crime, Brady.
Hey, everybody. Today we're diving into a headline that recently caught our attention. Younger Americans are planning more, but feeling it less. Basically, the data here says that Gen Z and Millennials are doing more financial planning than any older generations in the past, yet they still feel like they're more behind.
Now, let's be honest. If you're listening right now and you're in that camp, you're probably nodding your head thinking, yeah, that's me. Today, we're breaking down why this is happening, what could be contributing to this gap between action and confidence, and of course, what you can actually do about it. Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in. Michael, I am very excited for today's episode because I think it goes a little bit more off the beaten path of our typical strategy or topic conversation and is just more so a free-form chat about, hey, how are young professionals, young business owners, young Americans feeling financially and why?
Yeah, today's topic really stems from us coming across an article that was produced by Investment News entitled, Younger Americans are Planning More, but Feeling It Less, right? And we, of course, can probably fit into that camp of being quote unquote younger Americans and being able to resonate with that, right? As we wade through the journey of life, knowing that, hey, we probably still have 20, 25, maybe 30 years of a working career, all these milestones that we want to achieve. But when we compare ourselves to our peers that are maybe closer into the back nine of their career, getting ready for retirement, things just seem a lot more difficult or stressful today for us, maybe compared to what they experienced.
So let's go through it a little bit. Summarize what you pulled from the article or some of the findings that you found interesting.
Yeah, so in the article, they reference a Beyond the Finance study of 2,000 U.S. adults, which resulted in 60% saying that they plan to increase their financial understanding this year, right? So for 2025, with a strong push towards personal accountability. Okay, so what that tells me is that, hey, people are trying to be proactive and becoming better when it comes to managing their personal finances. Now, 74% in that same study report handling their finances themselves versus 69% are tracking their spending or, at least have plans to do so. So they haven't quite taken action, still doing it themselves. So in a recent study produced by Beyond Finances, they asked 2,000 U.S. adults, of which 60% said they plan to increase their financial understanding this year with a strong push towards personal accountability. So there's proactive steps being taken by these individuals who were surveyed, of which 74% report handling their finances themselves. Okay, so they're DIYers. And 69% of those individuals state that they plan on tracking their spending themselves or they're doing so already. Okay, again, what this tells me is that, hey, we recognize that as our environment becomes a little bit more difficult to navigate with all of the demands on our lives, financially, professionally, and personally, that we need to take more proactive steps in being better prepared.
And if you were to, as you were reading through the article, determine who is really voicing this idea of, hey, I want to be more prepared, I'm taking action to be more prepared, there's more moving parts in my world, like who would you categorize as this person, either in age, demographic, career, standing? Yep.
Yeah, no, good question. So they clearly note that the millennials and the Gen Zers are the ones who are taking more proactive steps at this point. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is based off of, again, the stresses, the anxieties, demands of today's world financially and professionally compared to that of the boomers who were either already in retirement or closely approaching retirement.
So let's talk through what we're hearing when we're speaking to clients in that 25 to 45 range. Like, what sentiments are you getting from people? What things are you hearing on a day-to-day basis? If you had to summarize anything.
I would say biggest summary is that, one, where do I start? Okay, I'm making money, now what? But also, there are just a lot different demands on the generation for millennials and Gen Z that coincide with having to figure out how to handle higher cost of living today, right, in comparison to what the average income is to where inflation is at or cost of living. Two, housing costs, right? I think we're in a period of time where it's actually, in most instances, and again, this is my opinion, not referencing any sort of specific stat, but from what we see, in most instances, it can be cheaper to rent than it could be to go out and buy your own home, right? Which is completely different than the 80s and maybe even the 90s.
Yep.
And then also this newer idea of having to repay back loans for the cost of higher education, let alone the most important, I would say, but also something that's been around the longest, which is planning for retirement. I know we're going to touch on all these, but those are the stresses that are coming up the most. And it's really, how do I balance all of these, as well as put myself in a position to be able to start checking off some of the milestones and goals that I have around these specific items, or wanting to get married, start a family, go on a honeymoon, and everything else that comes along with growing wiser in our careers and our personal lives.
I would totally agree. I mean, if I were to sum up what you said just there, is for most of the clients that I work with, you work with, our team works with, what oftentimes I'm hearing is I feel like I'm doing all of the right things, but even though I am, it's not enough. I still feel behind. I still feel stressed. I still feel uncertain about, hey, am I putting myself in the best position? Because my life right now isn't as easy, perhaps, as I otherwise may have expected. When I went out to college, got a good degree, got a good starting job, and now I'm kind of in the mid-throes of my career. And it feels like, despite making all of the right choices up to this point, that I'm not that much farther ahead than anybody else is.
I would be curious to get your opinion on the matter of, do you feel like younger folks, younger professionals are just being too hard on themselves today, and some of that being a contributing factor from the development and adoption of social media? Or is it really just a reflection of real financial headwinds that we're all dealing with?
I think it's a mix of both. I think financial headwinds are always going to be present. There's always going to be a new challenge, something different that this generation is dealing with that the previous generation did not have to deal with. There's always changes in the overall environmental landscape. I think the big problem is, for most younger professionals, is perhaps just the lack of perspective or wisdom that may come with age and seeing a true financial plan come to fruition over time. And really what I mean by that is, a lot of young professionals step into the financial planning world, start making all of the right decisions, and then they get impatient, right? 6 months go by, 1 year goes by, 5 years go by, and they say, hey, why isn't my plan basically fully matured yet? When in reality, a true financial plan may take 20 to 30 years to truly see the fruits of your labor blossom.
Correct. And I would even add to that most financial planning isn't all exciting. Like, there are going to be instances where the plan being developed and designed and implemented are exciting because it's a new change. It's a new experience. You're starting to see the strategic moves come to light, right? Come to fruition, produce some sort of positive outcome in many instances, or in some instances, producing a negative outcome and having to pivot and adjust just based on new data that's been received. But when you take the average life expectancy of a financial plan, which could be 10, 15, 20, 30 years of working with somebody, depending on when you start that relationship, it's probably not going to be exciting every single time that you meet with your advisor, or every single time that you're just getting a pulse check. My opinion is that that's the misconception that has been developed by younger generations because of everything else that we choose to engage with, which again comes typically to instant gratification or comparing ourselves. Right, comparing ourselves to our peers.
And I think that's where a lot of times we see this myth of that, hey, by making good decisions, you become an overnight success, right? At the end of the day, hey, I can go on social media and see that anyone in the world may be more or less successful than I am, but I have no real understanding of what behind the scenes things look like. I have no real understanding of what planning they had done up to that point. I don't even know the decisions this person may or may not be making. And most of the time, their goals are not my goals. So it's very challenging, right? Despite the financial headwinds, those are always going to exist, but it's really challenging to put a financial plan in place, and once that's finished, look around and say, hey, what's everyone else doing, and why does my life not look like that yet?
And I want to go back and reference another section of the article by Investment News. And so this states that stress is also clouding judgment for these younger professionals. Again, Millennials and Gen Z, where 60% of Gen Z and 56% of millennials say anxiety impairs their ability to make sound financial decisions. Now, that compares to just 18% of boomers, suggesting that younger generations may face not just more volatility, but more emotional vulnerability. And I think this is where the element of behavioral finance really comes to the forefront, which is, I won't say a completely new idea or practice, but it's becoming more and more relevant for our profession, as well as how we engage and guide clients, as opposed to just taking a spreadsheet approach.
We are just as much the coach now as the mathematician behind the scenes.
Correct. Let's revisit some of these stressors that we talked about early on. Again, rising cost of living versus wage growth. Okay, so why is it harder to feel the progress today, in your opinion, for these young professionals?
I think it's harder to feel progress today simply because this bigger picture idea of making progress, moving forward, and really driving mobility in an upward direction from a wealth strata or wealth class is more challenging. And in very simple terms, what I see that as is it's harder to get a leg up on where you started from in today. If I had a reasonable upbringing, I went and pursued higher education post high school, I got a great first job, and I'm making good money as a young professional, there are a million other young professionals who look and feel just like I do. It's really hard for me to say, hey, I've taken all of these steps early in my journey, and all of those steps immediately lead to me being better off perhaps than I was before, my family was before. Right? It's harder to get a leg up, and I think that leads to some of that stress, some of that emotional vulnerability. And it's truly an emotional headwind in that, hey, progress doesn't feel quick, right? I have to work really hard and be more strategic to see the progress that for previous generations may or may not have come easier.
I love that point. And because I am a nerd when it comes to the data, let's just think about up until this point, coming out of COVID and the pandemic, there was obviously a significant increase in just cost of living and inflation. At its peak, if we were to reference Guide to the Market produced by JP Morgan, it will illustrate that at its peak, inflation was increasing by a little over 9% month to month. Now, fast forward a couple of years since that peak, and it's back into normal, what we would consider normal range, being around 3.2 to 3.5% month to month. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cost of goods have gone back down to what they were a couple of years ago. It just means that the rate at which they're increasing month over month has stabilized, in less words. Now, take all of that and let's add in this new idea of, hey, from a wage growth perspective, there's now more competition in the professional arena. If you go back to the 30s and 40s, Morgan Housel in his book, The Psychology of Money, references or states that in that time frame, about 1 in 20 professionals were getting a college education or higher education.
That's 5% of Americans, right?
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. Fast forward to, let's just call it 2010, 2015, it shifted to being about 1 in 4. So not only is there more competition, but what comes along with the competition or this idea that, hey, if I want to become more marketable, if I want to receive the potential for a higher entry-level paying position, I need to go get a skill set or be educated or trained in a specific way, which requires a pretty high ticket price, right? That ticket price is cost of tuition for maybe 2 or 4 years from an undergraduate or associate degree standpoint. Not only planning for that higher education, but repaying the cost of that education if you're an individual who's taking out student loans is very much a new idea that's probably only, I'd say, anywhere from a little over 40 years old, plus or minus.
Yep.
Definitely younger than the shift that took place in the 80s from having your employers save for your retirement for you through the form of a pension plan to shifting into, hey, you're going to have to start saving for your own retirement through the form of a 403B or 401k.
So with that in mind, what I'm essentially hearing then is it is more challenging to be successful because there's more competition out there in the marketplace, and to really set yourself apart from others in the realms of success, it costs more now, i.e. student loans. And then add that on top of the fact that now you and I are fully responsible for funding our retirement instead of our employers compared to 30 or 40 years ago. All of those are new stressors, and all of a sudden it doesn't feel as easy to move upwards in class and wealth and income as it may have felt for someone in the 70s, the 80s, maybe even the early 90s.
Correct. And let's think about that in practice for a second. So let's think about the retirement savings aspect. Let's just say you're making, I don't know, $75,000 a year. Well, if you are saving 10% of that each year, that's $7,500 that's going into a 401k. Well, prior to 401ks, your employer was putting money into a pension plan on your behalf, meaning that you got to take home an extra $7,500 a year before taxes. Just think about what you could do with that extra $7,500 a year, right? Smaller scale numbers. But what if you were making more income, right? What if you were making $250,000 and that's now an extra $25,000 a year that you're taking home to apply towards other areas of your world, your financial vision, like saving for higher education for your children? That's an extra $25,000 that could go towards that. But in reality, you're now having to parcel that out and make a decision with your future self or a negotiation with your future self of saying, okay, do I put this 10% of my income into my 401k for my future financial success so that I'm not a financial burden on my children? Or do I parcel some of it to a 529 plan so that my children don't have to take out student loans like maybe I'm battling with? Or do I only put 5% into retirement because the other 5% has to go towards paying back my student loans that I took out because we just didn't have the funds to pay for that cost of education when I was growing up?
And we didn't even talk about lifestyle yet, anywhere in there, right? Along
Right.
the way, saying like, hey, I want to enjoy a little bit of what my world looks like on a day-to-day basis. I want to be more comfortable. And I think that's where a lot of clients find stress. It's lack of comfort or lack of security, one of the two. So as I begin to summarize, at least what we've talked about so far, is first and foremost, a lot of stress comes from a little bit of this impatience mentality. Right, that success may or may not happen overnight, where many boomers and older individuals have a bit of the wisdom that comes along with age. Right? It's taken some time to get here. Couple that lack of wisdom, perhaps that some younger Americans may have, with the challenge of it's harder to move upwards, and now being responsible for more savings of your own financial future begins to compound that stress problem even more.
And I think this is where we can lean back into the topic of the unrealistic idea of overnight success and how that can lead to developing or defining goals that just aren't realistic altogether. Some of that's going to be based on us comparing ourselves to others, but also many Americans, in my opinion, follow this idea of a standardized script of what it means to achieve either the American dream or just financial success, such as buying a house, maxing out their income earning potential, climbing the corporate ladder, having a fat and healthy 401k or 403b, having little to no debt because debt is the worst thing in the world for you. And again, that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of others in the financial services industry. So what we have to recognize, or what we help coach our clients through behaviorally, is this idea that, hey, your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.00001% of what's happened in the world. But just maybe 80% of how you think about how the world works will impact your decision-making process significantly more. It'll be more powerful if you take time to stop and say, okay, how does this decision of how the financial landscape work, or the real estate landscape work, or the higher education landscape work, how does this impact my financial well-being today? It's more of a behavioral shift compared to, well, when I graduate high school, I need to go to college to get a degree. Then from there, I need to get an entry-level paying job that should be paying me X, Y, and Z right out of the gates with these benefits. One of the talking heads in the media said that I need to be contributing at least initially 10% towards my 401k.
If I'm not doing that, I'm not successful.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not successful. I'm missing out,
Yep.
right? Which leads to this idea of FOMO, which in my opinion is just wrong. And then after a couple of years, maybe 1 to 3 years of working professionally, I should probably go ahead and buy a house. And of course, need to have 20% down so that I don't have to pay property mortgage insurance, PMI, all while I'm still building out this financial plan towards financial freedom and independence. You and I can agree that saving 20% for the down payment on a home today, I won't say is an outdated idea, but we see it less and less in conversations with clients and prospects. Most of them are striving to put a down payment of anywhere between 5 and 10%, 5 and 15%. Why? Because the cost of PMI just isn't the same as what it was in the 80s and 90s.
In addition to that, saving 20% down towards the house is in direct competition with any other goal that client may have.
Right.
Unless that's their only goal, there could be other uses, needs, aspirations for their savings, knowing it's limited.
Correct. And just to put that into perspective, if we're going to save 20% for a down payment, and let's just say median home price in your geographical location is $500,000, that means you need to have access to $100,000 within the first 1 to 5 years of your professional working career to be able to go to the table and have a competitive offer and buy your first home. And that's not even taking into account where interest rates might be and what your amortization payment might be, and then how that monthly payment for a mortgage is going to compete with all the other financial goals that you have from an eroding factor standpoint on your cash flow. So yes, stress is real. Anxiety is real. This overwhelming feeling of, hey, maybe I'm not as lucky as other folks. Maybe I'm starting back further behind my peers, can really lead in and create, in my opinion, what I would consider imposter syndrome for a lot of young professionals.
Yep. So with that in mind, then, what's the coaching look like from your end, from our end, when you have a client that's feeling that stress, that may or may not be behind, or at least feel like it, and is asking questions like, hey, what do I do? Right? Because I don't have the answers.
Yeah, I think you have to go on this journey, right? Either on your own, with your spouse, with your financial professional that you trust, to say, okay, what is it that's most important to me? And let's look at a shorter time horizon of 2 to 5, 5 to 7 years. What is it ultimately that I want to accomplish? But then being able to express why. What's the emotional tie to it? What is the gratification that comes from it? Why is it so important that it's even on this list?
And I think a lot of times what we hear is that why is it checks the box.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone else is doing it. It's like, hey, that may not actually be the why.
Right. Everyone else is jumping off the bridge into the river. Why don't I do it too? I just hear my mother saying that to me. They're not my child. I don't care what they're doing. Well, understand that the board game that you're playing may not be the same board game that someone else is playing, right? Their goals are different than yours. Everyone's goals are not the same. Also recognizing that, hey, there is a lot of luck that comes into this as far as where you start out, because no one chooses what family they're born into or what continent they're born in and anything else like that. So we have to make the best out of the cards that we have dealt to us. Now, at the same time, as you start to put these important items on the table for you, then it's a conversation of, well, how do I prioritize this? Why is this one goal of buying a home, as an example, more important than me paying off my student loans? Or what if it's the inverse? Is that the wrong order of operation? All while still maybe having the goal of, hey, I want to have 1 year's worth of gross income on my balance sheet in the form of assets by the end of year 3. Well, does that shift the order of operations? Have you thought about that? Because maybe it does.
Especially when you tie in the idea of what emotional and financial security and stress feels like. At the end of the day, setting goals that are most meaningful to you as an individual, prioritizing or at least understanding why they're important, and then balancing the fact that you're also a human being. You have stresses, you have insecurities, you have other challenges that may be around the corner. And how do you balance all of those decisions together?
And this is where, again, the financial planning process needs to be humanized, right? We're not making decisions purely based off of spreadsheets, and we don't live our lives off of the analysis or outcome or output of a spreadsheet, or even Chat GPT for that matter, right? It's really trying to figure out what really makes me tick, what motivates me, what concerns me, what excites me. How do I prioritize all these things that offer all these emotions from the highest to lowest priority? And then let's create a clear and flexible plan and input some automation, standardize the process so that it's one less thing that you have to think about. It's one less stressor for you. Or even better, one of the things that we will often say to our clients is that, hey, because we're working together, this is one less thing that you technically have to stress about. Let us take this stress on for you.
Yep.
Let us dedicate the time and energy in developing a plan to this equation and allow us to help put our best foot forward to say, hey, this is going to give you the highest probability of success and get you closer to the things that you want to accomplish. and then allow us to be the project manager and keep eyes on it for you. Obviously, you can't set it and forget it. I would never recommend that to anybody. You need to check in and make sure that things are still progressing in the way that you expect. And if not, understand why. But again, your plan needs to have some clarity to it, but you also need to allow some flexibility, some ebbs and flows to be experienced along the way, because nothing's perfect and we can't let perfect become the enemy of good, right?
Yeah.
If it's a matter of just improving over time. So there are 3 questions that we believe that you should ask yourself before chasing any new financial goal as you start to develop these and design these. Because, hey, we hear you as far as Gen Z and millennials. There are a lot more stressors we're dealing with today, and we want to be better financially so that we can have the same success that maybe our parents or grandparents had, if not better. And so again, these are the 3 questions that we believe that you should ask.
1, does this goal, at least the one that I'm talking through, currently align with my season of life? The second question we often ask is, will it improve my financial security, or will it improve the amount of stress that I'm feeling? And then the third question is, am I making this decision for me, or am I making this decision to keep up with the Joneses or to compare myself and my success to others?
Now, I think these are great questions that need to be discerned and thought about before, again, making any sort of hard decision to work towards any sort of goal or objective.
So here's a question that I have for you, Michael. We've talked through the idea of patience, knowing that any financial plan is not going to be an overnight success. We've talked through it being challenging to move upward financially, and that a lot of new variables are in play that previous generations have not really had to tackle or face. For millennials and Gen Zers, what is your opinion on whether or not they have to be more or less strategic than perhaps prior generations?
My opinion on the matter is that Gen Zers and millennials have to be more strategic in the financial decisions that they make, because there are a lot more variables that have to be accounted for today compared to generations past. Okay, and again, clearly stating that this is my opinion, primarily because some of the things that we've talked about. 1, cost of living is higher today than it was decades ago when comparing cost of living to average earnings per year. 2, cost of homes completely different, right? As far as what you could get in relation to the amount of income you brought in each year in, let's just say, the 80s compared to today or in the 2000s when looking at the ratio of earnings to the cost of home. And if you want to read a really good article that speaks about that, you can go to moneygeek.com, and they have an article titled, "Is it harder to buy a home today than in the 1980s?" One of the stats really quickly that they pose is that when looking in the 1980s, the price to income ratio between house and income was about 2.5 compared to 2023, 4.4. Clearly higher cost in comparison to your overall income. Also, this idea of saving for retirement, saving for higher education, but also all the distractions. We are being programmed as a society, in my opinion, that we need to not be satisfied with where we're at today. We need bigger, we need better, we need more. That does not help from a financial planning standpoint, because this idea of more is always going to lead you to be dissatisfied with where you're at. And it's going to create this experience of a moving goalpost, which makes it that much more difficult to achieve goals. Because if it's constantly moving, or if we're constantly getting distracted, or what I like to refer to as squirrel syndrome, then it's going to make it so much more difficult for you to find consistent, disciplined success. And again, that's just my opinion on the matter.
So in simpler terms, it's hard to find those regular victories. If overnight success is not the reality, well, knowing that, it's important to find, or at least take note of, small victories before the goalpost moves again, if it needs to move again at all. Right at the end of the day, if there are not any new goals or new priorities or new planning considerations that won't either improve your financial situation or de-stress what your world looks like, the goalpost doesn't have to move, despite what everyone on social media is saying.
Correct. And I would also say that if we're going to bridge this confidence gap between building momentum, celebrating wins, and having this experience of financial independence or financial success like boomers may be experiencing, then we have to develop a plan that offers flexibility. How do you do that? By increasing the amount of liquidity you have on your balance sheet. Access to capital. If you don't have access to capital, if you're locked out of your own money, and we've harped on this in past episodes, it really makes it that much harder to achieve a lot of your financial goals.
And more stressful, I think, is the big thing. There are so many clients that we speak with, especially those who have been DIYers for quite some time, that come to us and by far and large are ahead of their peers in the amount of money that they've saved, but most of it is now locked inside of their 401k. That client is feeling just the same, if not more stress than the client who may have half the wealth that they have, but the client with half the wealth has access to most of it in that example. And so it's really important to understand, hey, what buckets am I using? What access to money do I have? How is that access to money giving me options, not only across my financial goals, but across my emotional security type of feelings? And then balancing that with the fact that, hey, I don't know what the future looks like, right? It's balance. And that's where I think a great financial professional comes into play and says, hey, everything that's going on right now, it's working towards this bigger plan. You as the DIYer may not be able to see it just yet, but an experienced financial professional can say, hey, all of these different buckets are working together and you are on track.
Right. They're going to be able to do that. And then they're also going to be able to hold you more accountable than you would as a DIYer to say, hey, these buckets are working, but they're not quite accelerating at the pace that we had forecasted because you're not holding up your end of the bargain, or you're getting distracted. Or when we come to a meeting and the client says, hey, I know we're working on this, but I just got distracted by this new flashy thing that I saw someone on social media that I don't really know, but I know them through a friend of a friend who looks like they're just having the best life ever. I want that. Well, we have to reel it back in and say, okay, how is that relevant to any part of this existing plan, right? You haven't brought that up to this point. So let's discuss this further. Help me understand why this is important before we just start putting red ink all over the financial plan that we've developed up to this point with marks, right?
I think that goes to show from a true coaching perspective. Like, Michael, I may ask you this question. When you had a bad game in your college lacrosse days and you felt a little bit down on yourself, you put in all of this work and all of this practice and the game didn't go well, you got beat up a little bit. Like, who did you go to, or what was the driving force to get you back on your feet again to play in the next game?
It's your coach, right? Or the assistant coach or the team captains or your peers, right? Someone who's going to hold you accountable and have a non-emotional tie to, what you're feeling from that outcome, but also providing some objective criticism, right? In a constructive way to be able to build you back up and say, hey, this isn't your forever. Yeah, you had a bad game. You were terrible. Get over it, right? You can sulk now, but you only get 5 minutes. Let's move on to the next one. And, what can we do better to prepare for the next competition, for the next match, for the next game?
In a simplified format, too.
Right.
A lot of times you as the player is like, what exactly did I do every single play, and how did it all go wrong all at once, and what could I have done A, B, and C, when a lot of times the coach just steps in and be like, hey, man, just pick your head up or keep your eyes up a little bit longer. That pass will be there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of not falling victim to the analysis paralysis of having that objective third party come in and say, hey, this is it, right? Let's make some changes.
We reiterate this all the time. Working with a financial advisor is not what I feel like past generations experience, where everything is decided upon based on spreadsheet outputs. Because of the increased number of variables that we have to account for as working professionals. And one more thing that I would add is that we have this journey that we're going on financially where we often refer to the accumulation phase, right? What does that look like? Just think about you going on a hike with a spouse or with somebody, right? Maybe yourself, up the side of a large peak. That's your accumulation phase. That's you working from your 20s into your, I'd say, mid to late 50s. And then as you get really, really close to that peak, where you're going to stop maybe for the night or some time to rest before you start making your way down the mountain, down that peak, that's when you're getting very prepared for exiting the workforce. Working capital is going away, income's going away based off of what you're able to produce in the workforce as a professional or business owner. And then as you start going down the mountain, that's your deaccumulation phase. That's your retirement distribution phase. It's completely different. There are different stressors. There are different anxieties. And you need to understand that because you need to be mentally prepared for that. But how do you become mentally prepared? By doing the small things today and focusing on what you can control today and not having squirrel syndrome.
Well, Michael, very well said there. If you think about climbing the mountain, it often feels most daunting or most stressful right when you get started. And I think that's how a lot of young professionals today are really feeling. There's a lot of new variables. I've never climbed this mountain before, and I'm just getting started. So generally, to summarize at least how or why Americans, and especially younger, are feeling a little bit more of that stress, first and foremost, there's not as much wisdom and patience through age and experience. Second, it's harder to move up the mountain, right? With so many people climbing all at once together, it's harder and harder to move forward above and beyond, notably more successful perhaps than the first person that's ever scaled the mountain. The third challenge, and I think is a big one, is the 401k can be a real hindrance in cash flow for lifestyle, cash flow for alternative goals, and in general just puts more pressure on you to save for your own retirement as compared to in the past where employers may do it for you. There's more visibility into what everyone else is doing, so we can look right over the fence and see what the Joneses are doing, and it begins to feel stressful if our yard doesn't look just like theirs.
Or the Kardashians.
And then, as Michael and I have noted the whole time, right, there's just more variables, more student loans to consider, higher housing prices to consider, more competing variables, right? So with all of that in mind, truly some things to keep in mind is to understand, hey, what's important to you and why? How are things being prioritized, and what plan do you have in place to capture the small victories and successes that you're seeing along the way? Knowing that in patience and in time, the mountain's going to look much less daunting as you continue your financial journey.
Very well put, Brady. And friends, that's a wrap for today's episode. Hopefully you're walking away knowing that if you've been feeling like you're doing the work but not feeling the progress, you're not alone. And there are ways to flip that script.
And remember, financial planning is not about perfection. It's about progress and purpose. Don't let the highlight reel of social media tell you otherwise. Focus on the right next step, not the perfect one.
And hey, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got a burning financial question or a topic you want us to tackle on the podcast, head over to www.genesiswealthplanning.com/AMA. Drop your question there and we might feature it on a future episode.
And as always, if you found this episode valuable, do us a favor, subscribe, leave a review, share this episode with someone who could use a little financial fortitude. And until next time,
stay steady, stay strong, and keep building your financial fortitude. Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities, products, and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hammerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077. 7237198.9 expiration 627.